I'm having a good time tonight. I'm enjoying the pictures of when we were skinny and had hair. I still have hair, but I'm not skinny. The 80s was a time. A lot of things happened, but this church started 35 years ago, 1984, and we have the Croaks and the Van Teams here. They've been in this church for forever, and we want them to just briefly testify, but I want to ask a specific question within that testimony, and for the men first, is, you know, they say the economy is really bad. They always say the economy is bad everywhere. When I lived in Puerto Rico, the economy was bad, and I lived in New York, the economy was bad, and I lived here, the economy was bad. The economy is always bad. But back in '84, they said it was real bad. There was nothing here, there was no, you know, now we got all the, you know, Onslow County's growing, has Western Boulevard, all that stuff, you know, but back in the day, they didn't have all that, right? It was pretty bad. And so, my question to you is, when you, why did you decide not to go back home when the economy was that bad, when you were in the church?
Because I figured one day the economy would be good. No, to be honest with you, I stayed because of God. It was actually, we went to our first conference, our first Bible conference, in '84. We were sponsored at it, and we went to our first Bible conference. We actually got a word that God wanted us to stay right where we were at, and there was going to be attacks against our lives to try to pull us out of what the will of God was. And my kids at that time were staying with my mother, and so I told my wife, I said, look, after service, I said, we need to call my mom. I want to know how the kids are doing. As soon as I called my mother said, hey, look, I want to tell you the kids are doing great, but I want to tell you, when you get out, I have an apartment for you that you won't have to pay hardly any rent on, and we got a good job waiting for you to come back. And so the assault started that day, and immediately I told my mother, I said, you know what, Ma? You can keep the apartment, you can keep the job. I'm going to stay in Jacksonville, and I'm going to serve God. And at that time, we had a lot of people in this city that said that they were going to stay here and they were going to serve God. And everybody that said that before us, you'd see a U-Haul going down the road and they'd leave. And I want to tell you, most of those folks that left, in fact, almost every one of them, they're divorced today, and they're not serving God. So we stayed to serve God.
Amen.
Well, like Brother Art said, for God, you know, we found a family here, a home, and the economy was never even a consideration. We knew somehow God was going to take care of us. And I remember when Brother Croak got out, he was like the front runner getting out of the Marine Corps. And my brother, he had his car possessed. He moved out of town where terrorists did not have a place to live. He was camping out in our little church on Gum Branch Road. And I tell you what, man, I said, my brother, God's hand is on him, and I'm getting out, and I'm not going home. My wife, Elaine, she was from California, I'm from Michigan, and this is our home, and we felt God had a destiny for our lives.
And a question I have for the ladies is, what did you think when your husband said he wanted to get out of the military and stay here in Jacksonville and serve God in this church?
Well, I was behind him until the economy did me. And we had no job, we had no money, we didn't have anything, we couldn't find a house. And I said, Art, I think we need to get a U-Haul and go home. And he said, I think we have to go to Pastor's house. And we did. And we just prayed about it, and God really moved, and He has totally blessed our lives. And I just thank God we made the decision to stay and serve God.
I was okay with it because there was no place for me to go back to. I didn't really have a family to go back to, so staying in Jacksonville wasn't even a question. And like Crystal said, thank God He's seen us through these last 35 years, really blessed us.
And one of the things, you know, this fellowship is about is concert ministry. We do play concerts, not for fame, but to try to draw in a crowd, trying to get people saved. We've done this since the beginning. And so I want to talk to you about the band that you formed. You didn't form a band? Oh, Wally didn't form the
The
band?
first one Kevin did.
Okay, so the band that you formed originally, tell us why did you form it and what was your vision for it?
Well, going back shortly after I was still in the Marine Corps, and, Pastor John Kamui said we need to get a band together, and I could barely play the drums, even less than I can today. And Andrew Montemeyer, he was a good guitar player. We had a guy named Greg Myers, he was on the bass. Marcy Camus was a singer, and we called ourselves Firepower. And so we played, we did a few concerts, a few music scenes, it was all geared around reaching souls. And then Pastor Camus said, you know what? I want an all-man band. You guys are going to be traveling. You guys are going to be going out, to different churches. So Marcy dropped out, so we needed a lead singer. And so we didn't have a singer, so we started doing auditions, a couple. Dave Castellano auditioned. He was a really good singer. But then he decided he didn't want to commit to that. Then Perry Dominguez, he auditioned, and he had a lot of gusto, man, a lot of passion. And then, so we're just talking it over, and Andy goes, hey, Wally, you want to try singing? I said, I'm trying to play the drums, but I guess I could try singing too. So it worked out. God, somehow it worked out. And then fast forward to about 4 years ago, the band had long disbanded and, decades. And I came up to Kevin at one haunted house. I said, hey, Kevin, what do you think about getting our old band together? You got me kidding me, man. He started laughing. I said, he said, you serious? I said, yeah, what do you think? So he said, well, we'll get Art to play bass. So,
So Firepower is not Broken Reed.
well, it's
In a sense.
Firepower, sound rock.
And you guys are still young, so.
There's people in here that are older than us.
So what I'm asking
I'm not gonna point the finger.
is, can you guys play us one song from your band? You still got it? So give it up for Broken Reed. They can be playing a song for us. As they say, I was trying to look for something that actually happened in 1984 of significance, but what the world deems important is pretty stupid to us, and so I couldn't find anything. But the only thing that I found that was important in 1984, I'll say the other one later, but the first thing I found was that Coca-Cola actually can put their liquid in a bottle. That's all I can find. Nothing real significant in 1984, but who cares about Coca-Cola? Let's give it up for Broken Reed. They're going to be playing us a song.
Test.
Glory to God for Broken Reed. Let's give him a hand clap one more time. So we're also going to have another interview from one of those early core faithful members that have stood the time through the ages with Jeff Martin.
How long have you been in the church? 34 years. 34 years. And so, can you just give us a brief testimony about who preached to you and how you came into the church?
I was in Okinawa, Japan on a youth deployment with 1st Battalion 6th Marines in January of 85. And I was with SPAC'd out to something called CCU, a lot of you aren't familiar with because I don't believe it exists no more. It was Correctional Custody Unit. And that's where Marines that don't behave themselves take sledgehammers and make big rocks little rocks. And I was a senior watchman there, and my wife and I, we were married 16 months at the time. We were already talking about getting a divorce. I tell people, like many of you know, my God was the Marine Corps and my hobby was drinking. Karen said it was the opposite. And so when I went to Okinawa in January '85, I said, you know, I'm a jerk. If my wife is smart, she won't be there when I get back. And January, February, 3 months later, a young corporal that worked with me from 1-5 Camp Pendleton, he went to the church in Oceanside. And he had gone through something similar. His wife was foreigner, she was Filipino. He was a drinker. And he said he got saved. God delivered from his drinking. And his marriage is really stronger now. And even though I put up the fronts then, I cursed him out is what I did. And but after a while, I realized he was telling the truth. You know, I needed to change. I was raised Catholic in St. Louis in a big Irish Catholic family. And even though I can say I'm a Christian Catholic, I didn't know God. You know, if the Holy Spirit bit me in the rear end, I wouldn't know him.
And how did you get here?
Well, I got saved April 3rd, 1985. And after my 6 months in Okinawa was over with, I came back here in June of '85. And while I was over there in Okinawa, I prayed. I said, God, my wife's a diehard Catholic. You guys didn't know Karen back then. Karen had her own little altar in her bedroom, little plastic figurine of Mary and, you know, Holy Virgin and Jesus and all this. And she had candles there, like out on the tables now. And she'd say her devotions every morning faithfully. But when I got saved, for the first time in my life, I actually prayed in Okinawa. And I said, that's another story. I said, God, teach me how to pray. Our fathers, holy beef, you know, whatever you call it, the glory, whatever the thing is, I forget. But I said, you know, these aren't prayers. I was frustrated. And I went to church that morning. The pastor was Pastor Don and his wife, Yumi Bishop. And that morning, it was only my second time in church. Pastor Bishop said, you know, I was going to preach on something else this morning. But when, on the way to church, he says, God taught me to preach on something else. God told him to preach on something else. He said, I'm going to preach on prayer. And he gave that Our Father that the Catholic Church is familiar with, the guidelines in the Bible for prayer. He went through that and explained it, you know, in layman terms. And since that day, then, you know, I know how to pray.
Something important happened in the 80s. I mean, in the world, what happened in the 80s, you know, what was important was Gremlins, Ghostbusters, and Footloose was the #1 movies out there. But something significant happened that the world doesn't know about, but heaven does, and that's that a man named Perry Dominguez accepted Christ in his heart, and they told me that you actually witnessed to him. How did that happen?
Well, I don't know where that got started at, but we got to make something clear here. I never witnessed or prayed with Perry Dominguez. I don't know how that got started, but I can tell you a story.
So tell me,
Perry, when I got to Okinawa, my commanding officer called me into his office one day, and he said, Staff Sergeant Marty, I don't want to do this. He says, but Staff Sergeant Marty, I don't want to do this. He says, but I have to send you TAD orders to CCU. He says, I sent 3 other staff NCOs down there, but they looked at the record books and they refused them. They sent them back here. They don't want them. And you're the only one I got left. So I got sent down. Don't think that your salvation, folks, is coincidental. God orchestrated every step of it. Every single step He's orchestrated. And I went TAD against my will. And so I went down there and I was a senior watch standard in charge of a section. And it's boot camp number 2 is what it is. Perry, I got to tell you why Perry was there. I got saved, and I was at my second church service, and a couple, I said, God, help me remember these couples' names, because I wrote them down this afternoon, because I forgot their names. 34 years ago. It's not long ago, but when you're 61, it's much longer. You know? Carla, his name was Carl and Paula. I don't remember their last name. Carl and Paula was the couple that actually prayed with Perry Dominguez. He was a new convert. He got saved on a Sunday afternoon because Monday morning he was being driven down to CCU to become what we call a restraining in. He got sentenced to 60 days at CCU. And the reason he did is Perry did 2 things. Perry, back in the days, back in the 80s, guys, in 1998, the United States military left the Philippines. Before that, you didn't have to have a passport to go to the Philippines. All you had to have was a set of orders and a military ID card. That was your passport. Well, Perry used to type up his own orders, and he took his ID card, and Perry would go from Okinawa to the Philippines to see Josie. And so he got caught. That's one of the reasons he was in CCU. The other reason Perry wound up in CCU was they had a couple of new joints right out of boot camp come to his unit in Okinawa, and Perry decided, he was a prankster, you know. he put on somewhere he got a staff sergeant's blouse and a drill instructor smoking, and he started thrashing these guys on the used quarterdeck when they joined. And a gunny walked in, and that was another reason why Perry was the CCU for impersonating a staff non-commissioned officer. But Perry, my second time in church, I got saved on a Sunday morning. My next time in church was Wednesday night, and Carl, Paul, his husband, came to me and said, hey, there's a guy that just got sent to CCU, he told me his name. And I thought, oh, that son of a, you know, because I was familiar with him. And what I did is, Perry would tell you I was instrumental because I kind of cut Perry a huss. The only thing you can read in CCU, even if you were a Navy corpsman sentence there, you only can read essential subjects. EST book, Marine Corps EST book. You weren't allowed to have any other type of reading material. And when we did an inspection one day, I found a little New Testament, a little pocket Bible. Perry had it stuck under his fart sack, if you know what a fart sack is. A fart sack is when you pull a blanket over your pillow and tuck it in tight on your rack. That's called a fart sack. And Marine Corps terminology. Well, Perry, I found this little Bible underneath this fart sack, and I said, what in the world is this? This don't look like no EST book to me. And Perry was just standing there shaking like Leaf didn't know what to say. You know, he was a newcomer too. And I said, I'll deal with you afterwards. And so I was a newcomer. I couldn't tell this guy. I mean, I had enough conscience that God gave me not to tell this guy you can't read your Bible, because I'm in the main office. My duty, I'm reading the Bible, you know, because I'm a newcomer. So I had him see me afterwards. He came into my office, you know, like boot camp all over again, boom, boom, boom. And he had a request permission to enter private, get in here. And he stood on this line in front of my desk and told me to ease. And I told him, I says, I know who you are, because I was told that you go to the same church I go to. And you're not supposed to read anything but EST in here, you know that? And he said, yes, Senior Washington. And I said, but I'm going to make an exception to you. I said, if you volunteer to be the laundry private at night, because we had a laundry room in the back of the squad bay. If you volunteer to be the laundry private at night and do these guys' laundry and ironing, then I'll stash that Bible back there, and when you go back and do your laundry tonight, you can read your Bible when the machines are operating. And so we made an agreement, a gentleman's agreement, and Perry will go back there for the 2 months he was there. I think it was 60 days he got sentenced to, maybe it was 90. But Perry got the laundry done, and he got to read his Bible.
That's a story I didn't know. And we thank God for Jeff and his faithfulness in this church and the years that he's been here, 34 years, and for his involvement with Perry Dominguez. And speaking of Perry Dominguez, we're going to have a video right now of Perry and Josie. Thank you.
Brian, Wally, and we were fellowshipping, and a couple other brothers. We were just, you know, kind of dreaming, and just, wow. One day our church will send out churches. One day we'll send out churches, maybe even overseas. What if we would be able to do that? It just seems so far away at the time. I think that time we were probably 50 in attendance, and we just said, what if one day our church is a conference center? We began to pray for that. We began to really contend for that, believe God for that. But it just seemed like it was so far in the distant future that our church would have conferences, that we would be sending out churches, and much more, even the possibility of sending them out overseas. But just begin to pray for that, begin to believe God for that. And I remember when I first met Kevin Babcock, he was... in the car.
Okay. That's a little bit too long of a story, but so out of Perry Dominguez getting saved, we have the church that was built there. They began to pray, just like as he said. They began to believe God, pray for souls, want to see churches go out, overseas works. They began the core began to pray and believe God as they outreach, as they fellowship, labored. Our pastor, as God began to grant that, and that church began to grow, our pastor, Suspensy, came, and as that church is growing, he's seen the ministry need for an evangelist. So we're going to have a testimony with our first evangelist, Brian McRae. I'm sorry, Craig McLaughlin.
I know who I am.
How you doing? Good to see the greatest evangelist in our fellowship. That's what the conference body said. So give it up, give it up. When I do security alarms in Jacksonville, I get people who often ask me the question, why did you end up here in Jacksonville? And but they ask me in a way like, Jacksonville's horrible, why did you end up here? It gives me an opportunity to give them my testimony. I'm like, well, that's a long story, and then I'll tell them about everything that happened, and they're just looking at me like, wow. So, but I'm going to ask you the same question, because you're originally from Massachusetts. So, why did you end up here in Jacksonville?
Well, that's a long story. As everybody else is here. So I got saved in 1983, and it was under the ministry of Paul Stevens. The church had just begun there, and it was being pioneered. And I got saved in the second service. I was 16, and I was a junior in high school. So young kids can certainly live for God. I did immediately. Felt called to preached my first music scene at 17, and then process of time, did some Bible studies. And then there was a need at the time for an evangelist up there, kind of part-time. And so at 19, I preached my first revival meeting. I wasn't even married. I wasn't even dating at that time. And so God just, took me a different path. And we're a lot smarter now. We know better. But back then, there was a need. And so I was in that church for many, many years. And so Pastor Suspansky would come up to the conference on the Cape. And we got to know him. And then in '96, we went and took a church in Marietta, Georgia, which is just a little bit north of Atlanta. And so that's where we really got tied in here with Jacksonville. And so we'd come here as our regional leadership church in the area. So we'd come to all the men's classes, we'd go, the rallies, we'd come to the healing crusades and different events that happened here. And so I had Pastor Suspansky come preach a revival for me when I was there in Georgia. I thought as a pioneering pastor, I needed some leadership to come in, and then also him as a man that's launching churches would be good if he saw the city. And so, get a burden for Atlanta and come and help us. And so he came, and I knew right from the very beginning, I saw, I'd known him on the Cape Church for so many years, but I didn't really know his ministry. And so we'd been beating our heads against the wall for months, trying to get visitors, trying to get anybody to come to church. We had a terrible building down around the back. It was a lousy location. And he came, and from the very first service, we had record attendance. We had people who hadn't been in church forever that were there. We had visitors. And I knew, I was like, what just happened? What happened was he came. And all that he is came with him. And so I began to notice, it was hard not to notice, the ministry that was flowing through him toward people. And so a number of years later, we were leaving that church. We're headed back to the Cape to evangelize. And Pastor called me while we're on the way and said, there's a kind of a need. You've been an evangelist. And, in the South, there's lots of small churches. Right now, he said he's financing pretty much everybody's revival meetings. And he said it would be real helpful if we had somebody who could sleep in their own bed. No hotel, no airfare. He could just drive and commute. That'd be a real help, and help some of these churches to break through to the next level. And he said, would you come for 1 year? And I didn't know that you could even do that. And so I called Pastor Campo. I was under him. And he said, yeah, you're already in the South. You understand, the mindset. You're tied in with that group. Yeah, go for a year. And we'll reevaluate and see what happens at the end. So I came in here, it was at that time 2001. And I never felt more like a guy coming off the bench and the last 3 minutes of the fourth quarter only to grab rebounds. I'm here for 1 year for one thing, and that's why I'm on this team. And I'll tell you what, as soon as we got here, I began to just see the dynamic of this congregation that flowed from him and from the military. There's so many elements in this church because of the military culture that's here. There's a lot of don't ask, don't tell. And so I was amazed when we first came here how little gossip there was. People, we'd see some folks who would obviously crash and burn, and you say, what happened there? I don't know. Why don't you know? They didn't tell me and I didn't ask. And that created such an atmosphere for people to get redeemed. Because they would say, well, do you know what happened? I say, no, but Pastor knows, and that's all that matters. And we just keep going. And then there was the culture of people who can follow orders. And so you just say, this is what we're doing, and everybody would follow that. Everybody would show up. Everybody would come to that. They'd say on Wednesday night, we're starting Bible studies on Friday night. This Friday night, check the list. And we still do that. And so that's that culture that's here. And then I also noticed, how some of the men that were sitting in the church at that time, there was groups of men that had entire rows of people that they brought with them, visitors, new converts. And we walk in, these guys were back for redirection. Some of them were back for redirection. They weren't funky, they weren't hopeless, they didn't have bad attitudes, they had fruitfulness. They came back and they found fruitfulness in this church. I began to see there's a culture here of repair and restoration. When I came in, I was fairly cynical. We'd gone through some hard times there in my church, and I made a lot of mistakes. I just didn't know any better. And so, but when I came here, I really thought there are certain things that people do that they cannot recover from. You do this, man, it's over. And I would see those things happen in this church, and I'd go, oh man, that's it for them. And then I'd watch Pastor work with them, love them, sometimes not even say anything to them, just pray for them. And those situations would turn right around. And I began to realize anyone can get restored. And anyone can get restored right here. And there's such an atmosphere of acceptance and of family. And so this is not my home, but it's now become, my first home. I don't think of the Cape as home. I don't think of when we were pastoring as home. I think of North Carolina, and especially Jacksonville as home, because of the atmosphere of how people have taken in. Basically, I was adopted into this congregation. And so we decided, we're going to buy a house, we're going to settle down, we're going to raise our children here, and we're going to give ourselves to the vision that's working, because there's an atmosphere. There's so many people. Just look around regular services that are not from Jacksonville. They were from another church, another place. They got either invited here like I did, or maybe they got commanded to come here, or they got put out and forced to come here, or paroled here. We got a few that ended up at the Barnes Home for Wayward Children. They ended up here. And it's just the atmosphere of restoration and recovery that anybody from anywhere can just join into this congregation and feel like a family, feel like a unit, and find hope for their future and the direction that they're going. So we're very happy to be here. We're very proud of this congregation, very thankful for the friendships and the warm embrace, and have no plans to go anywhere else. We're going to stay right here.
Certainly glad you're with us. Thank you for your testimony. I appreciate his ministry as well in Marietta, because they send the team to Puerto Rico, and I ended up giving my life to Christ. So I never forget, how everything orchestrates. And we also have bands that we send out, evangelists and bands that we send out to, we have all types of bands, rock, rap, all types of different bands. And so back in the day, in the 80s, hip hop came out, and Run DMC and all those guys, out there making fame, the shell top shoes, they mixed rock with rap and all those things back then. And they did all that to get famous. Like I said, we don't do that for that. And so back in the day, there was a group that assembled, and they're called Final Call. And they're hip hop. They're right. You rap, do rap, no rock, rap. And so tonight, just give them a round of applause. They're gonna sing us a song tonight. They're gonna rap us a song tonight.
Do my song, John. Do my song. Test. 1, 2. 1.
Let God have your heart. 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 Let God have your heart.
Been watching you for all of your days. that I had inside. Nobody cared for me, so I leaned on my pride until I heard of the one who died for my sins. Because he cared for me, he removed the blinders, now I can see. His death on the cross of Calvary was my victory. Now I'm gonna praise his name. I'm on my way to heaven, not headed for the flame. I want the world to see that my life has changed. Give God your heart, he'll do the same. My love can't stop your searching. Can I have your heart? Still lonely, I wanna be your one and only. I have your heart. Let God have your heart. Let God have your heart, 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 heart. Let God have your heart. Take it up. Only Jesus can set you free. Set you free. Your greater love has been or will ever be. Let him take your life. Let him have control. He wants to heal your broken heart and save your soul. He doesn't you now. Live your life for him. He will show you how. Jesus shed on Calvary. He washed your sins and his life eternally. I know this is good. My love can stop your searching. Can I have your heart? I see you're lost and lonely. I wanna be your one and only. Can I have your heart? I know that sin is hurting. My love can't stop your searching. Can I have your heart? I see you're lost and lonely. I wanna be your one and only. Let God have your heart.
Along with the music, the bands for outreach and all that stuff, another key element in the fabric of this church is our drama teams. So we have a throwback drama from some of our members. Are you ready, drama team? You ready? Roll it. Give me a mic.
What's this? It's a magic genie bottle. I guess it's nobody's. Says, wipe it, and you can get 3 wishes. Oh, I've always wanted 3 wishes. All right, let's go.
I'm free! Yes, finally! I'm free! Oh my God!
Oh, it worked!
Wait a minute. What year is it? What year is it?
It's 2019.
You see, 2009. Oh my, it's been 35 years?
Oh, I don't know. It's been here that long.
You know what? I'm such in a good mood. You know what? Instead of 3 wishes, I'm gonna hook you up. I'm gonna give you 4 wishes.
Oh,
Anything you want.
thank you.
Anything.
Oh, yes. Oh, I've always wanted wishes for a
Anything,
genie.
anything.
Okay, all right, I know what I want. Genie, I want to be rich. I want lots of dough. I mean, a lot of dough. That's rich.
I think I can do dough.
Yeah?
Look at that. There you go. Dough. That's some of the best dough you can have. Think of that. Dough. Yes, she loves it. I think she loves. Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh, this is not what
Dough,
I
yeah.
Genie, I want to make like dollar bills.
You can make the best biscuits and like the saying goes, time to make donuts, right? Make donuts with that, yeah.
Genie, you kind of
No?
What? No. Oh, Genie.
Well, you gotta be more specific, all right? Dough is dough, okay? So. What else? You got 3 more,
My next wish is gonna be, I want to be popular. I want to be so popular. I want to be like the best. I want the most likes. I want to be viral on YouTube and Instagram. I just want popularity.
Oh, popular. You mean like MTV, right? MTV. You know
What is
MTV?
that, like 5G or something? What is that?
What are you talking about, 5G? No, I'm talking about MTV. All the stars are there. Michael Jackson, Prince, Madonna, the Material Girl. You ever?
Genie, Michael Jackson's been dead a long time. And so
What?
is.
No way.
Madonna, no one wants to be like her. She's old.
You know what? Okay, we'll just bypass that one for now. Okay, just go on to your 3rd wish. We'll somehow combine it.
My 3rd wish. I know what I want. I want to be just like Meghan Markle and have my own Prince Charming. Genie, can you give me a Prince Charming? That's awesome.
Prince
Yes.
Prince Charming. Let me
Yes,
see.
just like Meghan.
I think I can do that. You know what? I have the right guy for you. Okay.
Okay,
Give me a sec.
Oh, yeah,
Here he is, your Prince Charming. Come on out. Prince Charming. There you go there. Oh, he's perfect. He's perfect.
my sweet Panda Bear.
Oh, folks, I believe we made a love connection. Look at him, yeah. All right.
Genie, I'm my Prince Charming, Genie.
You said Prince Charming. You look like you're tight, Larry.
You're so dumb, Genie.
You act so pro, Prince Charming, and I gave you Prince Charming. Grateful.
Charming, Genie. Prince Charming.
My name is Prince Charming.
Oh, Genie.
You don't think it's cute? You don't think it's cute?
First, I wanted dough for money. You gave me biscuit dough, and then
Which
I want
one?
popularity
Okay.
for you. Then I want Prince Charming. I want Prince Charming.
Charming. Why did you say so?
Mess it all
Charming.
up, Genie.
I came close. I think I came close.
You didn't even give me popularity. Oh, I got ripped off.
I think I could do something with that. What do you say, Prince Charming?
I got an idea. How to
Yeah.
make it popular.
Oh.
Here. You think my picture and her picture kissing. And now I will post it in Instagram and be popular in China, all of China.
What's that?
I wish I had never met you, and I wish you'd take him with you.
I can do that also. Ciao.
Only Jesus can bring you through riches and happiness.
Along with funny dramas to help bring a gospel message, it was that core of the church people that began to follow up with just people that would come in, they began to just love them, follow up with them. And we have a testimony, a video testimony from our missionary in Argentina, and a short, funny story about Elmer. And
probably did the most follow-up with me would be, well, one of them was Elmer. And Elmer helped me out a lot, big time. But I remember one night, I was in my barracks, and I just bought a big old Thompson Chain, King James Version, Thompson Chain Reference Bible. And so I was there reading it, and I get a phone call. And hello, brother, what are you doing? I said, I'm reading the Bible. Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure you are. I can come pick you up, okay? All right, sounds good, man. So Elmer came, he would always come by, faithful, man, come and grab me. And then we go and visit new converts and everything. And one night we went to visit this couple that lived right straight in front of the old church. There's a little road that went back, and there's a couple houses back there. And this guy got his car stuck to the side of the road. And so I said, well, we could help him out, El. I got my pickup back home there out on Gould Road. So we went out in Elmer's car. We went out to my apartment and got my pickup. And then, so went in there. It had been raining a lot. There's mud everywhere and stuff. That's why the guy got stuck. So I went in there with my little four-wheel drive pickup that I had, a little Mazda thing. And I got it stuck. So then Elmer's like, well, I said, well, I guess I got my El Camino. So we went all the way back out to the house again, got the El Camino, hooked it to the pickup truck, pulled the pickup out, and then we hooked it to the little car, jacked up the car, hauled it out. So that was one of the fun experiences we had on doing follow-up.
To God. Thank God for follow-up, because look what God is doing, amen. Many of us are here because of follow-up. As the church began to grow, naturally there were babies being born. And we're going to have a couple interviews. If you know who you're getting in, if you get an interview, come make your way forward. But naturally, as those babies are being born, we're going to have a couple testimonies from those kids that were born in this church now that are older. And hear what they have to say about growing up in the church, sleeping in the pews, etc.
Well, I feel old because some of y'all were my teen Bible study. Okay, so my question to y'all tonight would be, how was your life involved and affected by growing up in this church?
Okay, so my parents were one of the ones that came to church in '84, and I remember being a kid and going to band practice with my parents, and us playing in the back. And I remember, coming to the Saturday night concerts and seeing Kevin up there and John Silvetti jumping off the stage, and, doing all this fun stuff. And all us kids would be in the front and we'd be pretending to play the drums, pretending to play the guitar. I remember growing up with a lot of people that are still here today, and I remember wanting to do that. I was like, man, I want to be in a band. I want to be up there. I want to, do what my parents are doing, what everybody else is doing. And growing up, if I could describe it in one word, is that I'm just so grateful and thankful that my parents, came to this church, raised me, in a Christian home, saved me from a lot of heartache just by, just being involved in church and being around the people of God. Everybody here, you're like family, literally like family. I have a lot of family in Oklahoma, but I would say that this church is, even closer to me than my family. So I'm just thankful.
And I want to thank God for that. I knew you when you were 10, and I apologize all the times, in Puerto Rico, we brought all those teenagers there instead of 3 o'clock in the morning and Pastor Dominguez help. They seemed to like that, so we constantly did that. So,
I had no siblings, so.
How was your life involved and affected by growing up in the church?
Well, many ways. I was what? I was I guess that's bad. There you go. Testimony about me. Perfect. What was the question again? I'm sorry. No.
How was your life involved and affected by growing up in this church?
I was affected in many ways. I can say that my dad, I'm very grateful that my dad came to Jacksonville. My dad had, my dad's parents, they both graduated from MIT with PhDs, so they kind of looked at my dad, they frowned upon him moving to Jacksonville. They said, you're a waste of our, we wish we didn't have you. You just don't amount to anything because you're not at the level, you're not just pursuing education, your life is just, there's no point. They didn't have the vision. They were basically, everything was education, everything about education. So my dad was an outcast to my grandparents. So that being said, I know my dad had, gosh, I'm losing my train of thought here. I'm so sorry, guys. But basically, my dad, he decided to stay in Jacksonville. If he did not stay here, I'm almost positive that I would have not been born because there was a pastor that came. I don't know the pastor that came here, his name. But when he came, he asked if there was anybody that was having issues with having kids. And my parents, they had, I believe, like 5 miscarriages before me. And my mom was bleeding already at that time when the pastor asked her. And she went forward, and the pastor said, do you believe? And many times we're asked if we believe in God. We're like, yeah, I believe in God. But she said, do you really believe in God, that he can heal your body tonight and that you will be healed and you have a baby? And she said yes. She was crying. And later that night, she went to the restroom and stuff, but she ended up, being pregnant and having me. So that was a miracle in itself. And I'm here through that. And everything through life, I'm just very grateful for this church, very grateful for everybody in this place. I have very big shoes to fill with my dad, being missionaries. I don't do a lot in church, but I'm so thankful for this church. This church has been a reference point in my life. My parents as well, they walk and live the walk of faith. They just don't talk about it, but they live it with a passion. Being a missionary is hard. Being a Christian is hard, but if you put your faith in Christ, He's the center of your life, everything will fall into place. And so they have been a strong reference point in my life. Amen. So I'm so appreciative. Sorry. Banquet,
Yeah. Just like the sister said, man, forever grateful. Man, I 29 now, about to be 30 years old, and I look back and everything that I am today is because of this church. So when you ask how has it affected you, it's in every single way. In every single way, every part of who I am is a direct link to this church. All the people who have served, man, my parents coming here back in the 80s and giving their lives to Jesus and really deciding to stay married, deciding to stay in this church, have us and raise us in this church. My life is intertwined like a blanket woven together, man. It's everything. This church is everything to me. It means the world to me. Being able to be discipled by a pastor, by a man of God, who loves people. You heard the testimonies of people who came. Pastor McLaughlin just laid it out perfectly. I can't lay it out any better than that. But as far as what how I view my pastor, he's a man of God who loves people, and I'm thankful for all the chances that he's given me, to be discipled. All the dumb mistakes that I've made, all the rebukes, and now that I'm in a place in an environment where I'm a pastor, and I don't take it lightly, but I look back and I say, man, those rebukes were so necessary. They were so important, and the different trials you go through, the tough times you go through, I realized exactly what he was trying to put into me. I realized exactly the things that he was trying to place into my life. And so, man, this church means the world to me. And I can't imagine my life without it. There's no other option. There's nothing out there that I even want to even consider, because it's all about God. It's all about what He did for us, and it's all about furthering His kingdom. And I even look at men today who are here pastors, Pastor Vilas, Pastor Morales, these men who have been raised up, but I look up to these men and I say, that's what I want, and that's what I want to be like. I've asked Pastor Vilas this morning, I said, Pastor Vilas, how do I become a lion? I want to be a lion. How do I become a lion? And he gave me some little tidbits there. But I'm so thankful. God is so good. I'm so thankful. Forever grateful. Forever grateful. That's it. That's all I got.
God glory for all these things.
And so we formed a little band a long time ago, not in the 80s, but probably the early 2000s. And they were already a band, Super Truth, but I joined in about 4 or 5 years into it. And so over time, people came and gone, and eventually we dwindled down to a trio. Like a triangle, man. It's a perfect shape, man. The trio was just absolutely perfect. So we got a song. It's called These Days. Sometimes I look back and I think about some of the stuff we wrote, and sometimes it was a little corny. Sometimes we tried our best to make stuff work, but it was all geared towards sinners, man. And somebody asked me, they said, what do you think about when you're writing songs? What's the purpose? And I said, man, when I read a song as if I'm speaking to a sinner. I'm witnessing to a sinner. And I think that's what it's all about. Sometimes we can get up here and just do music, say some things that doesn't really make sense. But when you gear it, when there is a purpose to it, when you gear it towards something, it connects, And so let me get my pick here real quick. So this song is called These Days. Alright, sorry, I don't have any roadies like Kevin Babcock and Art, so I gotta get this stuff done myself. So, hey man, this song is called These Days.
one more time. Along with that, being the youngest band, we have one more band before our pastor comes to minister, and it is our youth that is still doing the same thing. From the beginning and even until now, God is still helping us. There's still vision being birthed. And let's welcome Resolution.
Awesome. All right, yeah, like I said, our group name is Resolution. We kind of came up with that name. The word resolution means a firm decision to do or not to do something. And, every four of us up here have all made a firm decision to follow Christ and just serve Him with all our hearts. So we thought that name, fit really well for our group. So we're a rap group, do some, singing and stuff. And also, it's just a blessing, just being so young, able to do something for God. I'm 18, I think 18, 17. 15, so we're all really young up here, but we all decided, why wait to do something for God? We've got the perfect opportunity. So this song is called, the song is called How to Love. Just kind of like what Nate was saying, we kind of write songs as if we're talking to sinners, and it just helps so much, puts you in their shoes. Songs, people always, looking at the wrong spots, for love. Chasing the wrong things, relationships. And so this song is just kind of like, yeah, I'm gonna stop talking and we can get the singing going.
Never really had love, could've never all these moments ain't gonna last forever, but there's a God in heaven who can put it all together. Jesus love, Jesus love. You had a lot of pain, yeah, you had a bad start, never really had love, couldn't never figure out how to love, how to love. Now you're thinking all these moments are gonna last forever, but there's a God in heaven who can put it all together. Jesus love, Jesus love.
Thank you. We're Resolution. Thank you, guys.
All right, now let's give a warm welcome to our pastor who's been faithful through the years, Pastor Stewart.
So thankful to God and to all of you for faithfulness in our service to God, the joy. Doesn't this conjure up all kinds of memories? And I heard the lies, testimonies up here tonight. Some of our youngsters, Nate Brown was about this big. One of my first encounters with him, he was swinging on the bar in the front door of the church. Some event we had going on, and we had food and brownies. Nate had a brownie in his mouth, and he was turning it into brown slime, and he was swinging on the door. And I walked up and I said, "What are you doing?" I said, "You make that mess." He goes, "You the boss around here?" I said, "Go to your dad and tell him to come over here and see." I don't know if you remember that, Wayne, but I said, and about 20 minutes later, I was doing something else, and I hear this guy, "Nathan!" He's at the front door with him, and Nate went and got him and showed him his little mark, and they were cleaning it up. And Nate's learned to clean up his own messes over the years, are very good. But we go back in time, there were times in the earlier days, the economy came out. I didn't put any of this together, the guys who did it, but when some of the early guys, the Crokes, Babcocks, all these other guys, Banquet and others, Brown, getting out of the military, even in the earliest of days, and the economy here was pretty slow. And I remember, I think Kevin brought me a little printout one time of how bad it was. We were almost the poorest of the poor, according to, it might have been Newsweek or something, some national study, our county. And we decided as a church we're going to believe God. And God has really helped us a bunch. I had a few notes here, but just some things triggered in my heart, Aaron Dominguez testifying about his uneducated parents. Perry and Josie are so dear to the hearts of our fellowship. And this church, there are our kids from this church, they're older kids now, but I don't know how many of you speak 5 or 6 languages, but these uneducated dummies do. Amen. And I'm just saying that they are not. But I know the battle Aaron talked about being pushed on Perry for decades. Come home, be somebody. Come home, finish the education. Come home. We have people all over the world today. I bump into people. I preached in China a month or 2 ago. I bump into people there that Perry Dominguez has reached somewhere along his journey, and they are living for God today and doing works for God. You can go all kinds of places. I go even here. I've been on outreaches to some of our other cities, and I'm literally in another city witnessing to someone and have them ask me, "You're where? From where?" And I tell them, "Do you know a guy?" And they'll name people from our church. That blows my mind. But this church has a testimony of faithfulness to the vision to reach souls and be what a church is called to be. So this church began by people that decided to stay and to serve. I mentioned to people in Africa 2 weeks ago, Uganda, in the conference body, we're addressing the issue of building churches. I said, churches everywhere around the world, our fellowship in particular, I know for sure, but in other places too, churches are built because people get touched by God and decide God is worth my whole life, and they stay where they are. So by the grace of God, 34 years ago, I got kind of adopted into the Bullhead City Church. And it's a long story, ministry and ministry moves and things happening. And sent out from there about the same time Pastor Lovato came in. he took us under his wing. It was a beacon of faithfulness and life and direction. We were just talking today. I heard him say something about the calendar, and I commented when I used to make calls and when I was pioneering, I always made sure I had outreach events on my calendar. And there were times I told him this, that I'd go to pick up the phone, I need to call him. I said, well, wait a minute, get my calendar out, look it through, make a few other phone calls first. Because he's going to say, what's in your calendar, Dave? And I'd say, well, we're working. They got outreaches. I tell you guys that. All you guys, some of our guys are chuckling right now because they're out pastoring. So I'm going to ask you, because this is what I learned. Amen. If you're busy doing the things of God, God will do his thing. And so I've learned a lot. I've been just blessed to have a relationship that lasts. It's solid. It's what it is. And it's just like what we have within this church. We're privileged people to know our God, to have one another. I'm just thankful. You know, God gave me a life. I had to go back to Arizona a few months ago. My little brother's just a couple years younger than me, passed away. I saw the emptiness of his whole life unfold in those couple of days before me to his grave, totally bitter. Where I was when God found me, he kept that spirit all these years. And I'm thinking, they all thought I was losing out in life. And I'm one of the last few standing in this family of mine, and I got all this people, love, family, kids, grandkids, brethren, Nate Brown. I got it all, amen. I thank God for his mercies. Amen. I want to turn the mic over to Pastor Robato. He's going to come and speak for a few minutes, and then as we subside after he's done, we're going to ask our preachers to come up. Just ask you to stand with us as we lay hands on them before we conclude this event. Let's welcome Pastor to the event.
Praise God. What a wonderful, how many like nostalgia? Man, what a wonderful, nostalgic, can you say emotional? Emotional. And so what this is just a wonderful trip down memory lane. What I'd like to do is I'd like to just kind of bring, how would you call it, maybe a biblical guideline and a biblical pattern of the wonderful things that you're involved in tonight. My wife and I, we first started coming to the church in Jacksonville. It was probably in the late 80s. The very first time we came here, and I don't know if many of you remember the little storefront building. At that time, if I remember correctly, it was Pastor John Camus and asking me to come and preach for the very first time here, and then just watching the process of changes, you know, starting from a storefront and going to all the various different buildings that you have been through the years, all the various pastors that you've been through the years. And so Pastor John graciously invited us to come. And then I was trying to remember, I don't know if he left Jacksonville, I don't remember if he went into Palmdale or if he went into Africa. And but what that necessitated is it necessitated a pastor here in Jacksonville. And I can remember talking to Dave and Cindy Fowles about coming here to Jacksonville, and in the small building. It was a small building. It wasn't a big church at the time. And when Pastor Dave and Cindy came in, that's when the church really began to accelerate. That's when the church really began to go. And then out of the blue, I can remember getting a phone call. I got a phone call from Pastor Dave, and he said, "I want to go pioneer. I want to go to Fayetteville." And so I said, "Oh, how about that? You know, and your wheels start turning." And at that time, what Pastor Dave said is him and Dave and Benita, they had assumed the responsibilities of the church in El Cajon, California, and they just built such a great little church. And Pastor Dave, I can remember from the early days of going and preaching there and laboring there and partnering together there. And then I can remember giving Pastor Dave a phone call and said, we have an opportunity in Jacksonville, North Carolina. What do you think about that? And it didn't take long for him to pray about it. Amen. And how many know the rest is history? The rest is history. And the history of this church, and we're so privileged, you know, there's so many people in here, I can't see your faces, I see your bodies, and what has made all of this possible tonight, what we so richly enjoy, it's a biblical pattern, it's a biblical tradition, and I want to give you two biblical stories. But before I do, you're talking about the importance of leadership, because you would not be here without leadership. You would not be here without godly leadership. And so his name was Curly Lambeau. Curly Lambeau, and it was late in the, it was very early in the NFL, and it was a very early playoff game. And the Green Bay Packers, they were playing the New York Giants. And so it was coming up to halftime, and Curly Lambeau was a possessed coach. He was a possessed coach, and what they were doing is they were losing the game. I think it was like 14-16. And so the coach was so focused on halftime and inspiring the team. They're losing, and I mean, he's going to give the rah-rah speech of his career, you know, and he's so focused on what to tell his team, you know, so they could come back and win the game. As they were going into the clubhouse for halftime, he didn't notice he went out the wrong door, and what he did is he walked out the door of the stadium, the door locked behind him, and he couldn't get back in. So he ran to security. And he said, well, you know, I got to get back in. I'm the coach of the team. And they said, yeah, right. You're the coach of the team. You're the coach of the Green Bay Packers. Hit the road, Jack. And so what he did is he ran to the next gate. And he said, you got to understand, I got to get in here. I'm the coach. And the security said, if you're the coach, then I'm the king of England. And they wouldn't let him in. And so finally, what he did is he went to the gate of that little football field that carries the name of Lambeau Stadium. He went to the gate, and the reporters and a bunch of people, they recognized him, and they said, he really is the coach of the Green Bay. And so they brought him into the locker room, but it was too late. His speech, he didn't have time to inspire his team. And so he ran out on the field, and they lost something like 21-17. Leadership is so critical. It is so everything comes down, whether it's business, whether it's sports, whether it's institutions, whether it's families. And such a critical element of the church is simply that. It's been the leadership of this church. And that it's not just the leadership, it's the pattern, it's the biblical pattern that you and I are so privileged to be walking in tonight. That pattern goes back to the book of Acts, where the church began to explode. People begin to come into the church, and then when people come into the church, how many know great means come into the church? And so the Bible says that the disciples were being multiplied. And the Bible says there in the book of Acts that this is what they said. The Jews and the Greek widows were arguing, and we can't wait on tables. We're preaching the gospel. And this is what the disciples said. They said, choose out from among you 7 men full of the Holy Ghost, full of wisdom and knowledge. And this is the principle that you see at work in your church right now. Is through the years. This is what leadership has done. Has chosen out godly men, ordained men that are pastoring all over the world because of the leadership here in Jacksonville. And then that principle, it goes back, because it just doesn't go back just to the book of Acts, because it goes all the way back to the book of Exodus. And if you remember the story, and I'll just close with this, if you remember the story where Moses is counseling from sunup to sundown, and his father-in-law, Jethro, he comes to him and he says, Moses, he said, you're going to kill yourself, man. You're going to wear yourself out. And what he did is he gave him that biblical advice. And the reason I bring this to you is this is the pattern we're walking in today. This is the pattern this church is enjoying today. And Jethro says, he told Moses, he said, if I could give you a little bit of advice, he says, what you need to do is you need to choose out able men. And these two stories where Moses chooses out the 70 elders, he picks out 70 men. And then also the book of Acts where the early disciples says, choose you out men of honesty and full of the Holy Ghost. How do you know that's what this church has been doing for decade after decade? Because of leadership. Because of leadership. That's the history of this church. Of godly leadership. And the reason that you hitched your wagon to this train tonight is obviously because of God. But because of something that you've seen in this church that works, godly leadership, reproducing other ministers, reproducing other leaders, and then raising up other disciples. And so this is what you've done in 35 years. Can you imagine? Can you imagine where you're going to be 30 years from now? The pattern that we have, the pattern that we have been entrusted with, the men that have developed as a result of that pattern, all I can truly say is we need to be a humble, that we need to be a grateful, and we need to be a thankful people for what God has done in this congregation, what God has done through godly leadership, and God give us many, many more years of fruitful ministry, couples and workers for the harvest field. We appreciate you, your sacrifice, your giving, Pastor David, Benita, your leadership, your faithful leadership, not just to this church, but to the entire East Coast. And all I can say tonight, folks, is our God truly is an awesome God. Amen. The Lord bless you.